Senator Rice.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yes, I just had a few quick questions about how the department has gone with the implementation on the government guidelines on recognition of sex and gender, which support gender diverse, transgender, intersex people and have an indeterminate marker on forms and databases, and to support transgender and gender diverse people.
Thank you, Senator. Yes, we have a policy, and I can just see my corporate team coming to the front to give you an outline of progress to date and what we've achieved. We have a very strong series of networks on those issues within the department, and I'm very proud to say that they are well supported right across the department. And in fact, I think it's only in the last couple of weeks our Pride Network have been conducting a survey of right across the department in support of some of the action plans that they're putting in place. But I'll ask Ms Smith to outline where we're up to. Thank you.
So, Carolyn Smith, Deputy Secretary, Corporate Strategy. So the guidelines on recognition of sex and gender came into effect in mid-2013, and departments were given 3 years to align existing and future business practices. So to meet the requirements of the guidelines, the department's done a number of things. We've added the Gender X field in a number of our forms and systems. We've updated all of the forms managed by the department to make sure that they're compliant with the guidelines. We've provided whole of department advice via our intranet and staff notices so that staff are aware of the guidelines and to ensure ongoing compliance. And as Dr Brunner just said, inclusion and diversity is a very core value of the department. We have got a workplace diversity and inclusion strategy, which is backed up by an action plan. We've also got active staff networks, including a Pride network, and those staff in that network are very active across the department in working with their colleagues to promote inclusion and respect.
Okay, thank you. That all sounds very positive. How about in terms of the engagement with the community and with any public databases, forms?
We certainly had a look at all our both internal facing and external systems to ensure that we were compliant with the guidelines.
Okay, so you're confident that all of the external forms and databases and where you're collecting information from the public is compliant?
There might be one or two of our historical systems which we're still looking at, and it's quite tricky with some of those old systems to retrofit compliance, but we certainly looked at this very thoroughly, and then we also had an internal audit in the middle of 2017 to just put the ruler over how we'd gone with implementation, and they felt, apart from one or two very isolated instances, we were in good shape.
Can you tell me what those isolated instances were?
I'd have to check that, Senator.
Okay,
and take it on
so
notice.
if you could take that on notice.
Yeah.
And can you talk through some more about sort of the training and things that you do to ensure respectful relationships, again, both internally but also in terms of relationships and communication with the public?
Senator, as I said, we have both a strategy that promotes inclusion and diversity and also an action plan. One of the things that we're looking at in the action plan is what are some of those underpinning practices that should underpin the way the department operates in terms of our commitment to inclusion and diversity, and then what are the specific things we might do in relation to particular population groups. In terms of one of those underpinning things, we've looked at unconscious bias training. We felt that that was an important philosophy and to have in place across the department, and that if we supported our staff in that area, that would then apply across the various diversity groups we have in the department.
So you've developed a training module on unconscious bias?
We are in the process of developing that, Senator.
Right, so you haven't yet rolled that out then?
I think it's still in the development stage.
And will that be mandatory training?
Yeah, we will need to work through those issues as part of implementation, Senator, but we certainly have a strong commitment to these practices.
So up until that, you haven't had any other training modules available for
I'd have
supporting respectful relationships?
I'd have to take on notice the specific training, but certainly it is something that we take very seriously, and in fact in our successive staff surveys that are done, we get very positive scores about the extent to which our staff feel, managers and staff across the department embrace diversity.
Now, how about with relation to agencies that fall within the portfolio? Do you know whether they are compliant with the guidelines as well?
Look, I'd have to take that on board and talk to the agencies involved, but certainly within the department we do play a role in supporting our portfolio agencies to be aware of and to implement a range of whole of government policies. The Secretary has a regular meeting with agency CEOs. We do so in other areas of corporate, but I'd have to take on notice whether this particular issue has been raised with them in the past.
Right. Senator, I'm happy to raise it at our next portfolio conference with them. It is critical. I'm sure when a guideline comes out, what we do is make sure all our portfolio agencies understand that it's there, but actually then checking,
yes.
I'd have to take that on notice.
And certainly that's, I've been asking these questions of all departments, and it seems that there isn't there's not uniforms of tracking or knowledge about whether in fact these guidelines have been implemented at an agency level, let alone even at a departmental level.
Well, I'm certainly happy to take that away, raise it at the next portfolio meeting and see what we can come back to you with in subsequent meetings.
Right, and how about with relation to your interactions with your state and territory agencies and departments in things that you might do jointly as to whether there is compliance with the guidelines in those sorts of operations?
So I think in most states and territories they have sets of similar guidelines, Senator, and the only reason I know that is having lived in 2 different states and territories in the past that go through the same internal audit process as we would in the Commonwealth. So our expectations would be they're probably following their own state and territory-based policy and the Commonwealth policy here, and there'll be similar characteristics across both according to legislation and so forth. So my assumption is that the states and territories in the education field do have in place those policies, but does it come up in terms of the officials meeting? I haven't seen it recently come up in officials meeting about that. So I could only really, I don't want to speculate that they do or they don't.
Right. Well,
But from a Commonwealth perspective, our portfolio agencies, and remembering our portfolio agencies interact with states and territories as well. So, for example, AITSL, the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership, and the development of teaching standards and leadership. They're a portfolio agency, would have a strong relationship with states and territories. ACARA, the Australian Curriculum Assessment Reporting Authority, would also. We have TEXA, ASCO, the regulators, to do with university sector. I'm sure in some of those standards they're quite explicit as well, but that's probably a better question asked for the portfolios.
right. Would it be, given the government guidelines that exist, would you feel that it's important that in terms of those interactions with the state and territories, that the state and territory agencies that you're working closely with are also compliant with the Commonwealth guidelines or the equivalent state and territory guidelines?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, that's what the guidelines are for, to make sure that...
Would you be able to take on notice then as to whether those agencies that your agencies work closely with are in fact compliant?
Absolutely, Senator. I'm happy to come back with you or take it on notice and supply that answer.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you, Chair.